Destroy everything, every letter, every photo, every medical record. If that woman ever tries to contact my son again, I will personally make sure she disappears from this city." Margaret Holloway stood in the private office of her son's penthouse, feeding envelope after envelope into a paper shredder. Dozens of handwritten letters from a pregnant woman begging the father of her unborn children to call her back. Letters Nathan Holloway would never see. Letters Margaret had been intercepting for 4 years, and when the last page was gone, she picked up the phone and called her attorney. "File the restraining order. Make it permanent. If this story satisfies your soul, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the name of the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels." The helicopter touched down on the roof of Cedars Medical Center at 7:42 in the morning, and Nathan Holloway was already on the phone before the rotors stopped spinning. "Tell Fujimoto I don't care about his timeline. We close on the Wilshire parcel by Friday, or we walk." He ducked under the blades, his suit jacket whipping against his shoulders, his tie loosened from a 5-hour red-eye he'd barely slept through. "No, don't soften it. Those were his terms 2 weeks ago. If he wants to renegotiate, he can find another buyer with $900 million in liquidity. I'll wait." His assistant Derek Chen walked 3 steps behind, holding a tablet and a coffee Nathan hadn't touched. "Your mother's expecting you at 8, Derek said. "Room 714. Dr. Ansari wants to discuss the biopsy results in person." Nathan pocketed his phone and didn't respond. He adjusted his cufflinks, a habit he'd developed years ago, the kind of mechanical gesture that let him stall for half a second before facing something he didn't want to face. His mother had been admitted 3 days ago for what she called routine tests. Margaret Holloway did not do routine anything. The woman ran a charity foundation, sat on 4 boards, and had once fired a caterer mid-event for using the wrong shade of linen. If she was in a hospital bed, something was wrong. The elevator opened on the 7th floor. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and reheated oatmeal. Nathan hated hospitals. He hated the fluorescent lighting, the way every surface was designed to be wipeable, the specific quality of silence that hung between rooms where people waited for bad news. Room 714 was at the end of the east corridor. He could see through the glass partition that his mother was sitting upright, reading glasses perched on her nose, marking something in a leather-bound planner as though she were in her home office instead of hooked to an IV drip. "You look terrible," Margaret said when he walked in. "Good morning to you too, Mom." "I told you not to fly in. It's a minor procedure." Dr. Ansari used the word biopsy on the phone. That's not minor. Margaret closed her planner. She was 71, silver-haired, immaculately groomed even in a hospital gown. The gown itself had been replaced. Nathan noticed she was wearing her own silk robe over it, monogrammed at the breast pocket. Some things were non-negotiable for Margaret Holloway, and looking like a patient was one of them. "Sit down," she said. "You're hovering." He sat in the chair beside her bed. The vinyl creaked under him. There was a vase of white lilies on the windowsill, and he recognized the arrangement. It was from the florist Margaret used for her own dinner parties. She'd ordered her own hospital flowers. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like a woman who's been poked with 17 needles in 3 days. How do you think I'm feeling?" "I think you're deflecting. I think you're projecting." She reached for the water pitcher and poured herself a glass with the deliberateness of someone proving she didn't need help. "The biopsy is precautionary. Dr. Ansari found a spot on the imaging. He's thorough, which is why I chose him. It's probably nothing." "Probably." "Nathan, I did not raise you to be an alarmist." He leaned back in the chair and looked at her. For all her armor, the robe, the planner, the lilies, she looked smaller than the last time he'd seen her. Thinner. The skin around her eyes was papery in a way that hadn't been true 6 months ago, when they'd shared a table at the Met Gala and she'd outlasted everyone at the after-party. "When do you get the results?" "Tomorrow afternoon. You don't need to stay." "I'm staying." "You have the Fujimoto deal." "Derek is handling it." Margaret studied him for a moment, then allowed herself the faintest smile. "Well, at least bring me a decent cup of coffee. Whatever they serve here tastes like it was brewed in a radiator." Nathan stood, grateful for the excuse to move. He stepped into the hallway and turned toward the nurse's station to ask about the nearest coffee that might meet Margaret Holloway's standards, which meant nothing from this building. That was when he heard the laughter. It came from the room next door, room 716. The door was partially open, and the sound that spilled out was unmistakable. The high, chaotic, layered giggling of small children. Not one child. Multiple. The kind of noise that filled a room like water, impossible to contain. Nathan wouldn't have stopped. He had no reason to stop. He was a man on his way to find coffee, thinking about biopsy results and a $900 million land deal, and the laughter of children in a hospital was background noise, something that belonged to someone else's life. But then he heard the voice. Eli, put that down. That is not a toy. That is a... Marcus, don't help him. Oliver, I swear, if you put that stethoscope in your mouth one more time... Nathan stopped walking. He knew that voice. He knew it the way you know a song you haven't heard in years. Not the words, but the melody, the rhythm, the specific way it landed in your chest before your brain caught up. He turned toward room 716. Through the glass panel beside the door, he saw her. Sophia Bennett. Sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, her dark hair pulled back in a messy knot, wearing a faded denim jacket over what looked like scrubs. She was leaning forward, one hand reaching for a small boy who was waving a stethoscope like a lasso, while two other boys, identical to the first, climbed over the bed behind her. 3 boys. Identical. All of them, maybe 3, 4 years old. Same dark curly hair, same olive skin, same wide, mischievous grins. Nathan felt the floor shift under him. Not physically. The linoleum was solid. The building was steady. But something inside his body tilted. Some internal architecture that he'd built over years of discipline and control. And for 3 full seconds, he couldn't breathe. He stared at the boys. The one nearest the window, the one Sophia had called Oliver, turned his head, and Nathan saw his own face looking back at him. Not a resemblance, not a similarity. His face. The jawline he saw in the mirror every morning. The specific set of the brow that every Holloway man had carried for 3 generations. The eyes, gray-green, slightly too close together, the exact shade his father had, and his father's father before that. Nathan grabbed the doorframe. Sophia looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and he watched the color drain from her face. Her hand froze in midair. The stethoscope clattered to the floor, and none of the boys noticed because they were still laughing, still climbing, still existing in a world where this moment wasn't happening. For 5 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Sophia stood up, crossed the room, and slid the door shut. The curtain inside swept across the glass, and Nathan was staring at beige fabric. He stood there. His hand was still on the doorframe. His heart was doing something it had never done before. Not racing exactly, but beating with a kind of force that made him aware of every chamber, every valve, as though his body was trying to keep up with what his mind had just processed. 3 boys, triplets, his. He knocked on the door. Not politely, not gently. The kind of knock that meant he wasn't leaving. Sophia. Nothing. Sophia, open the door. He heard movement inside. The laughter had quieted. The boys picking up on the shift in energy the way children always do, like animals sensing a storm. The door opened 6 inches. Sophia stood in the gap, her body blocking the view behind her. Up close, she looked different than he remembered. Older, obviously. It had been almost 5 years, but different in ways that went beyond time. There were lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before, and her eyes had a hardness to them, a kind of practiced wariness, like someone who'd learned to check the locks twice before going to bed. You need to leave, she said. Are those my children? You need to leave right now. Sophia, this is a hospital. My son is here for treatment. You're not going to do this here. Your son? Which one? She flinched. It was small, a tightening around her jaw, a shift in her shoulders. But he saw it, and it told him everything. How old are they? He asked, though he already knew. He'd done the math the instant he saw them. 5 years since the divorce. The boys looked about 4, which meant she'd been pregnant when he'd signed the papers, which meant she'd been pregnant when his mother had pushed for the settlement, which meant, Nathan, I am asking you to walk away from this door, and I'm asking you to tell me the truth. Are they mine? Sophia's eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. She held herself like someone who'd trained herself not to cry in front of other people, and the effort of it was visible. The tendons in her neck, the white of her knuckles on the door handle. "They are mine," she said. "They have always been mine. You don't get to show up 4 years later and claim something you walked away from." "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." She closed the door. He heard the lock click. Nathan stood in the hallway for a long time. Long enough that a nurse walking by asked if he needed help. Long enough that Derek came looking for him with an update on the Fujimoto deal that Nathan didn't hear a single word of. Long enough that the fluorescent lights above him started to hum at a frequency that felt like it was inside his skull. "Cancel everything," he said to Derek. "Everything?" "Everything today, tomorrow, this week. I don't care, cancel it." Derek stared at him. In 4 years of working for Nathan Holloway, he had never once heard the man cancel a meeting without rescheduling it. Nathan didn't cancel. Nathan rearranged. Nathan optimized. Nathan found a way to be in 3 places at once through sheer refusal to accept the limitations of time. "Sir, the Fujimoto's," I said, "cancel it." Derek nodded once and stepped away, already typing. Nathan went back to his mother's room. He sat down in the vinyl chair. Margaret looked up from her planner and studied his face the way she always did. Not with warmth, but with assessment, the way a general reads a field report. "What happened?" she asked. "Room 716, Nathan said. "Next door." "What about it?" "Sophia Bennett is in room 716 with 3 boys, triplets. They're mine, Mom." He watched her face. He watched it very carefully. And what he saw, or rather, what he didn't see, answered a question he hadn't known he was asking. Margaret Holloway did not look surprised. She looked caught. It was only a flash, a quarter second where the muscles around her eyes tightened and her hand stopped moving on the planner page. Then the mask came back. The composure, the control, the boardroom face she'd worn to 1,000 negotiations. "That's quite an assumption," she said. "You knew." "Nathan, don't manage me. I can see it on your face. You knew about this." Margaret set down her pen. She folded her hands in her lap with the precision of someone arranging silverware. "I knew Sophia was pregnant when you divorced." "Yes." The room went very quiet. The IV drip clicked. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled over tile. Nathan felt something crack inside his chest. Not break? Not yet. But crack. The way a foundation cracks before the whole structure starts to shift. "She sent letters," he said. It wasn't a question. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew. Sophia was a letter writer, always had been. She'd written him notes during their marriage. Real ones, pen on paper, tucked into his briefcase or left on his pillow. It was one of the things he'd loved about her, and one of the things he'd dismissed as sentimental when he'd started to pull away. "She sent letters to the house," Margaret confirmed. "Several." "How many?" A pause. "I didn't count." "How many, Mother?" "Over the years? Perhaps 40? 50? I'm not certain." Nathan stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot 7 stories below. Rows of cars glinting in the morning sun, orderly, contained, each one in its designated space. His whole life had looked like that parking lot. Everything in its place. Everything controlled. "You intercepted them." "I protected you." "From what? From knowing I had children?" "From a woman who was going to destroy everything we built." She was a line cook, Nathan. A line cook from Bakersfield with a community college degree and a studio apartment. She was never going to be... She was my wife. She was a mistake. And I handled it the way mistakes need to be handled. Completely and permanently. Nathan turned from the window. He looked at his mother in her silk robe with her monogram pocket and her hand-delivered lilies. And he saw her clearly for the first time in his life. Not the woman who'd raised him. Not the woman who'd guided his career, curated his social circle, vetted his relationships. He saw the woman who'd stolen 4 years of his children's lives and felt justified doing it. "What else did you do?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled. The kind of controlled that scared people in boardrooms because it meant the anger had gone past the point of shouting. "I did what was necessary." "What else?" Margaret met his eyes. "I had my attorney send a cease and desist letter. I told Sophia that if she continued to contact you, we would pursue legal action for harassment. I may have also implied that you were aware of the pregnancy and had chosen not to be involved. Nathan's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs. You told her I knew and didn't care. I told her what she needed to hear to move on. She was carrying my children. She was carrying a liability. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Liability. 3 children, his children, reduced to a line item on a risk assessment. Nathan had spent his career turning things into numbers, land into acreage, buildings into square footage, people into headcount. He'd never once considered that his mother had done the same thing to his own family. I need to leave this room, he said. Nathan, sit down. You're being emotional. I'm being a father. 4 years too late. He walked out. The door swung shut behind him, and Margaret Holloway sat alone in her hospital bed with her planner and her lilies, and the first genuine expression of fear she'd worn in decades. Nathan didn't go back to room 716 right away. He walked. Down the corridor past the nurse's station, into the stairwell where the air was cooler and the lighting was worse, and he stood on the concrete landing between the 7th and 6th floors and tried to make his hands stop shaking. He called the one person he trusted. Leo Vasquez picked up on the second ring. Nate, your mom okay? I need you to find something for me. Good morning to you too. Leo, please. Something in Nathan's voice made Leo pause. They'd been friends since Stanford, roommates, study partners, and later when Leo had gone into family law instead of corporate, their paths had diverged, but the friendship hadn't. Leo was the only person who called him Nate. He was also the only person who'd told Nathan, to his face, that marrying Sophia and then letting Margaret run the relationship was going to end badly. Talk to me, Leo said. I have children, 3 of them, boys. They're about 4 years old, and I just found out they exist because I walked past a hospital room. Silence on the line, then, where are you? Cedars Medical. My mother's here for a biopsy, and Sophia is in the next room with Leo. They look exactly like me. The Holloway jaw, the eyes, everything. Sophia Bennett? Your ex-wife Sophia? Yes. And you're telling me you had no idea? My mother intercepted the letters. 50 letters, Leo. She had her lawyer send a cease and desist. She told Sophia I knew about the pregnancy and didn't want anything to do with it. Leo exhaled. It was the sound of a man processing information that restructured everything he thought he knew. Okay. First, don't do anything stupid. Don't go back to that room and try to force a conversation. Sophia has every reason to hate you right now. She thinks I abandoned her. From her perspective, you did. It doesn't matter that you didn't know. She spent 4 years believing the father of her children chose not to show up. That's the reality she's been living in, and you walking into that hospital room doesn't change it overnight. What do I do? You let me make some calls. I need to understand the legal landscape, whether there's a custody filing, whether Sophia has any existing orders, what your mother's attorney actually did. Don't contact Sophia again until I call you back. Leo, I know what you're feeling. But you've got a 4-year deficit of trust to overcome, and you don't start that by cornering her in a hospital. Let me work. Nathan hung up. He sat on the concrete stairs and stared at the wall. Someone had scratched initials into the paint, JR plus AM, surrounded by a lopsided heart. Proof that even in stairwells, people left marks of the things that mattered to them. He thought about Sophia. Not the Sophia he'd just seen through the glass, the tired, guarded woman with the hard eyes, but the Sophia he'd married. The one who'd laughed too loud at his terrible jokes and burned pasta 3 times a week because she'd get distracted watching cooking shows and forget the pot on the stove. The one who'd smelled like garlic and lemon verbena, and who'd once driven 40 minutes to bring him soup when he was sick at the office because she didn't trust anyone else to make it right. He'd loved her. He was certain of that, even now, even after everything. He'd loved her the way people love the things they don't know how to keep, recklessly, without maintenance, without the daily attention that love requires to survive. And then Margaret had gotten involved. He'd been 32 when they married. Sophia was 28. They'd met at a food festival in Santa Monica. Nathan attending because a client was sponsoring a tent, Sophia working the line at a pop-up station for the restaurant where she was a sous chef. She'd handed him a plate of seared scallops with a brown butter vinaigrette and said, "If you don't like this, there's something wrong with your mouth." He'd laughed, and she'd looked startled that a man in a $15,000 suit could laugh like a normal person. Their marriage lasted 14 months. Not because they'd stopped loving each other, but because Margaret Holloway had waged a quiet, methodical campaign to make the relationship impossible. Dinners where Sophia was seated at the far end of the table, away from the important guests. Comments about her background delivered with surgical precision, not cruel enough to be called out, but sharp enough to draw blood. Suggestions that Nathan needed a partner who understood his world. Conversations with Nathan, late at night, about legacy and image and the kind of family the Holloway name demanded. Nathan hadn't defended her. That was the part he couldn't outrun, no matter how fast he built his empire. When it mattered, when Sophia had come to him with tears on her face and said, "Your mother treats me like hired help," he'd said, "She's from a different generation. Give it time." And when Margaret had pushed for the divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and producing a settlement agreement that was generous enough to look fair, Nathan had signed it because it was easier than fighting two women at once. He told himself it was the right decision. He told himself that Sophia would be better off without the pressure of his world, that she'd find someone who could give her the life she wanted. Something smaller, warmer, less demanding. He'd told himself a lot of things, and they'd all been comfortable, and none of them had been true. Now he was sitting in a stairwell with shaking hands, and somewhere on the other side of the wall, his three sons were laughing in a hospital room with a mother who'd raised them alone because his own mother had decided they were a liability. 2 hours passed before Leo called back. "Okay," Leo said. "Here's what I've got. Sophia Bennett, age 32, currently resides in a 2-bedroom apartment in Glendale. She works as head chef at a small restaurant called Fennel and Sage. Farm-to-table place. Solid reviews, nothing fancy. She has 3 sons, Oliver, Marcus, and Eli Bennett. Born October 14th, 4 years ago, at Cedars Medical Center, which is where you are now. All 3 boys are listed with Bennett as the surname. No father named on the birth certificates." Nathan closed his eyes. She never filed for custody because there was no custody to contest. As far as the legal record shows, the father is unknown. She also never filed for child support. No public assistance, no welfare applications. She's been doing this on her own, Nate. Why is she at the hospital now? I don't have that yet. Medical records are sealed. But if one of the boys is being treated, she may have been referred from their pediatrician. Cedars has one of the best pediatric units on the West Coast. Leo, I need to talk to her. I know, and I'm going to help you do that, but listen to me. You cannot approach this like a deal. You cannot walk in with a plan and a timeline and expect results. This woman has been raising 3 children by herself for 4 years while believing you knew about them and chose to disappear. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a wound. And wounds don't heal because you show up with the right words. Then how? You write her a letter. Nathan almost laughed. A letter. She wrote you 50. You owe her at least 1. Tell her what happened. Tell her about your mother. Don't apologize yet. An apology from you right now will sound like a negotiation tactic, and she's going to be listening for exactly that. Just tell her the truth, and then you wait. I don't wait well. I know. Learn. Come. Nathan went down to the hospital cafeteria. He bought a coffee that confirmed his mother's assessment of the brewing standards. He found a table in the corner, away from the television mounted on the wall that was playing morning news at a volume nobody could hear, and he took out a legal pad from Derek's bag. He sat there for 20 minutes without writing a word. What do you say to a woman who spent 4 years thinking you'd abandoned her? How do you explain that the silence she heard wasn't indifference, it was ignorance? That the man she'd married wasn't the monster she'd been forced to believe he was, but something almost worse. A man so disconnected from his own life that his mother could erase 3 children from it without him noticing? He started writing. The first draft was 3 pages long and sounded like a corporate memo. He tore it up. The second draft was 2 paragraphs and sounded like a greeting card. He tore that up too. The third draft was ugly. It was messy and rambling and honest in a way that made him uncomfortable, which is how he knew it was the right one. He wrote about the letters. He wrote about Margaret. Not to excuse himself, but to explain the mechanism of how 50 letters could disappear from a man's life without him knowing. He wrote about the divorce and how he'd let it happen because fighting for his marriage would have meant fighting his mother, and he hadn't been brave enough for that. He wrote that he didn't expect forgiveness, and he meant it, or at least he wanted to mean it, which was the closest he could get right now. He wrote about the boys. Just one line at the end. I saw their faces today, and I recognized myself. And I realized I've been missing for 4 years without knowing I was lost. He folded the letter into an envelope he borrowed from the nurse's station. He wrote Sophia on the front. He walked back up to the 7th floor, stopped outside room 716, and slid the envelope under the door. Then he went back to his mother's room and sat down in the vinyl chair and waited. Margaret was asleep. The planner was closed on her lap, and the reading glasses had slipped down her nose. In sleep, she looked like his mother, the real one, the one who'd held his hand at his father's funeral when he was 9 years old, the one who'd driven him to soccer practice in a Mercedes that smelled like Chanel No. 5, the one who'd built a wall around their family so high and so thick that nothing could get in, including the things that should have. Nathan sat beside her bed and listened to the machine's beep and the clock tick and the faint sound of children's voices through the wall. His children, his sons, alive and real, and 4 years old in a room he couldn't enter. Sophia didn't open the letter for 6 hours. She'd seen it slide under the door. She'd looked at it while Marcus napped and Oliver played with a toy truck, and Eli, her sweet, serious Eli, sat in the hospital bed with an IV in his small arm, watching cartoons with the sound turned low. Eli was the reason they were here. Eli, who'd been running a fever for 5 days. Eli, whose blood work had come back with numbers that made Dr. Ramirez frown and order more tests. Eli, who at 4 years old had already learned to sit still for needles because he'd been through this before. The ear infections, the respiratory issues, the immune system that never quite caught up to his brothers. Sophia had carried triplets to 34 weeks. The doctors had told her that was good. Excellent, even, for triplets. But Eli had been the smallest, the last to breathe on his own, the one who'd spent an extra week in the NICU while his brothers went home. He'd been catching up ever since, and Sophia lived with the constant, low-grade fear that one day he'd stop catching up. She picked up the envelope at 4 in the afternoon when Eli was sleeping and the room was quiet and she had nothing left to do but face it. She read it standing by the window with the afternoon light cutting across the page, and by the time she reached the end, her hands were steady, but her jaw was tight. She read it again. Then she sat down in the chair beside Eli's bed and pressed the letter against her chest and stared at the wall. 4 years. 4 years of midnight feedings and diaper changes and sick days and daycare pickups and grocery runs with 3 toddlers in a cart that wasn't built for 3. 4 years of cooking 12-hour shifts and coming home to a babysitter she could barely afford and collapsing into a bed that was too big for one person. 4 years of watching other families at the park. Fathers pushing swings, lifting children onto their shoulders, teaching them to throw. And telling herself the boys didn't need that. That she was enough. That she had to be enough because there was no other option. And now Nathan Holloway was sitting in the next room, telling her it was all a mistake. That he hadn't known. That his mother, his cold, immaculate, terrifying mother, had erased her from his life like a line item on a balance sheet. Sophia believed him. That was the part that made her angry. She believed every word because it was exactly the kind of thing Margaret Holloway would do, and because the Nathan she'd married, careless, conflict avoidant, brilliant at everything except the things that mattered, was exactly the kind of man it would work on. But believing him didn't fix anything. Belief didn't pay for Eli's hospital bills. Belief didn't undo the nights she'd cried into a pillow so the boys wouldn't hear. Belief didn't erase the scar tissue that had grown over the place where she'd once loved him. She folded the letter and put it in her bag. She checked Eli's temperature, 99.8, down from 102 this morning, which was something. She adjusted his blanket. She kissed his forehead, which was damp and warm and smelled like the hospital shampoo the nurse had used that morning. Then she went to the door, opened it, and looked down the hallway. Nathan was sitting on a bench outside his mother's room. He looked up when he heard her door open. He looked like he'd been sitting there for hours, which he had. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was gone. His eyes had a rawness to them that she'd never seen before. Not in 14 months of marriage, not during the divorce, not ever. "One of my sons is sick," Sophia said. "Eli. He's been running fevers for a week, and they're running tests to figure out why. That is the only thing I'm thinking about right now. That is the only thing I have room for." Nathan nodded. "Okay. I read your letter." "Okay. I need you to understand something. I don't care about your money. I don't care about your guilt. I don't care about what your mother did or didn't do, because the result is the same. My sons grew up without a father. And right now, one of them is lying in that bed with a needle in his arm, and he's 4 years old, and he doesn't even know what a father is. So whatever you're feeling right now, whatever shock or regret or righteous anger you've got, you're going to have to hold it, because I can't carry it for you. I'm full." She said it without raising her voice. She said it the way she gave instructions in her kitchen, clearly, directly, without room for interpretation. And Nathan, who had negotiated with CEOs and sovereign wealth funds and heads of state, heard a kind of authority in her voice that none of those people had ever possessed. "What can I do?" he asked. "Right now?" "Nothing." "Sophia, I said right now. I didn't say forever." She paused. Something shifted in her face. Not softening, but something adjacent to it. A crack in the wall, maybe. A place where light could get through if it was patient enough. "But if you mean it, if you actually want to be in their lives, then you need to understand that it doesn't start with a grand gesture. It doesn't start with a check or a lawyer or a helicopter landing on a roof. It starts with showing up, quietly, consistently, without expectations. And it starts when I say it starts, not when you decide you're ready." "I understand." "You don't, but maybe you will." She went back inside, the door closed, but this time she didn't lock it. Nathan sat on the bench. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere behind that door, a boy named Eli was sleeping with a needle in his arm and no idea that the man sitting 20 feet away was his father. Nathan Holloway had built a real estate empire worth $4 billion. He'd developed skyscrapers that changed city skylines. He'd sat across from the most powerful people in the world and made them blink first. None of it had prepared him for this. He pulled out his phone and called Leo. "She talked to me," he said. "And?" "She told me to show up quietly and consistently and without expectations." "Smart woman." "She said it starts when she says it starts. Even smarter." "So what are you going to do?" Nathan looked at the closed door of room 716. He thought about the boys, Oliver with the stethoscope, Marcus climbing over the bed, Eli sleeping under a thin blanket with a fever that wouldn't break. His sons, 3 people he hadn't known existed this morning, and who now occupied every corner of his mind. "I'm going to wait," Nathan said, "however long it takes. That might be the first smart thing you've said all day." Nathan hung up. He leaned his head against the wall and closed his eyes. Down the hallway, a cart rattled. A nurse laughed at something a colleague said. The afternoon light shifted through the windows, casting long shadows across the tile floor. And in room 716, Sophia Bennett sat beside her sleeping son and held a letter she'd waited 4 years to receive and felt the first tremor of something she'd promised herself she'd never feel again. She pushed it down. She'd gotten good at that. But it was there. And she knew, with the quiet certainty of a woman who'd learned to trust her own instincts because no one else was going to do it for her, that this was not the end of anything. It was the crack in the door she'd been afraid to open. Eli's fever broke at 3:17 in the morning. Sophia was awake when it happened. She'd been awake for most of the night, sleeping in 20-minute stretches in the recliner beside his bed, waking each time to press the back of her hand against his forehead the way her own mother had done when she was small. The thermometer read 98.4, and Sophia sat there holding it, staring at the number, and allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of relief before the next worry moved in to take its place. Doctor. Ramirez came by at 7. She was a small woman with short gray hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and she had the specific gentleness of a doctor who'd spent 30 years working with sick children and understood that the parents needed as much care as the patients. "His white count is normalizing," she said, scrolling through the chart on her tablet. "The cultures came back negative for anything bacterial, which is good, I think we're looking at a viral episode that hit him harder because of his history. I want to keep him one more night for observation, and then we can talk about discharge." "One more night," Sophia repeated. She was calculating. The babysitter for Oliver and Marcus, the shift she was missing at the restaurant, the copay on the room that her insurance would only partially cover. Every decision she made these days involved at least 3 other calculations running in the background. "He's a tough kid," Dr. Ramirez said, "and he's got a tough mom." Sophia smiled because that was what you did when people said things like that. You smiled and you nodded and you didn't tell them that being tough wasn't a personality trait. It was what happened when the alternative was falling apart and there was no one to catch you. After the doctor left, Sophia helped Eli eat half a cup of applesauce and most of a popsicle. He was sitting up now, still pale, still smaller than he should have been, but the light was back in his eyes, that quiet, observational intensity that set him apart from his brothers. Oliver was the loud one, the climber, the boy who treated every room like a challenge to be conquered. Marcus was the negotiator, the one who figured out early that charm could get you a second cookie. But Eli watched. Eli noticed things. Eli was the one who, at 2.5, had pointed at a photograph of a man on a magazine cover in a waiting room and said, "Mama, who's that man?" And the man had been Nathan Holloway, and Sophia had turned the magazine over and said, "Nobody, baby." She thought about that now, sitting beside his bed while he licked the last of the popsicle off the stick. She thought about all the small lies she'd assembled over 4 years. Not malicious ones, but structural ones. The lies that held things up. "We don't have a daddy. We have each other. Some families look different, and ours is the best one. You don't need anyone who doesn't want to be here." That last one had always tasted bitter in her mouth because she'd never been entirely sure it was true. The boys didn't ask about their father often. Oliver never did. Marcus asked once around his 3rd birthday, and seemed satisfied with a vague answer, and Eli asked with his eyes more than his words, looking at other families in the grocery store, at the park, at school drop-off, with an expression that Sophia couldn't name but recognized in herself. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, not the sharp, demanding knock from yesterday. This one was quieter, almost hesitant. She opened it expecting a nurse. Nathan stood there. He was wearing different clothes, jeans and a gray sweater, which she'd never seen him wear in the entire time they were married. He looked like he'd slept about as well as she had, which was to say, barely. He was holding a small bag from the hospital gift shop. "Before you say anything," he said, "I'm not here to push. I'm not here to negotiate. I heard from the nurses' station that Eli's doing better, and I brought him a stuffed animal, and if you tell me to leave, I'll leave." Sophia looked at the bag. Inside was a plush elephant, gray and soft, with floppy ears and a tag still dangling from one foot. "He likes elephants?" Nathan asked, and the uncertainty in his voice, the way he asked it like a question about his own child, like a man who didn't know the most basic facts about a boy who shared his DNA, nearly undid her. "He likes dogs, actually," Sophia said, "but he'll take the elephant." She stepped aside. It wasn't an invitation exactly. It was more like the absence of a refusal, which was the most she could offer right now. Nathan walked into the room. He moved carefully, like someone entering a space where the rules were unfamiliar and the consequences of getting it wrong were severe. Eli was sitting up in bed, the popsicle stick still in his hand, watching the man who'd just walked in with those wide gray-green eyes that were so obviously Nathan's that it almost hurt to look at. "Eli," Sophia said, keeping her voice even, "this is Nathan. He's a friend of Mommy's." "Hi," Eli said. He had a small, serious voice. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. Nathan crouched down beside the bed. He was too tall for the chair and too stiff for the floor, so he ended up in an awkward half-kneel that made him look nothing like the man who appeared on the covers of business magazines. He held out the elephant. "I heard you weren't feeling great," Nathan said. "I brought you this. He doesn't have a name yet, so you can pick one." Eli took the elephant. He examined it with the thoroughness of a quality inspector, turning it over, checking the ears, pressing its nose. Then he tucked it under his arm. "Frank," he said. "Frank? His name is Frank." Nathan looked up at Sophia. She was standing by the window with her arms crossed, watching the interaction with an expression he couldn't read, some combination of protectiveness and something else, something that might have been grief for all the moments like this that should have happened and hadn't. Frank is a great name, Nathan said. Are you a doctor? Eli asked. No, I build buildings. Big ones? Pretty big, yeah. Bigger than this hospital? Some of them. Eli considered this. This hospital is really big. I got lost going to the bathroom yesterday, and a lady had to bring me back. That sounds scary. It wasn't scary, it was annoying. Nathan laughed before he could stop himself. A real laugh, surprised and unguarded, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than social performance. Sophia's arms tightened across her chest. I need to make a call, she said. I'll be in the hallway. 5 minutes. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Through the glass, she could see Nathan still kneeling beside the bed, and Eli holding Frank the elephant, and for a disorienting moment it looked like a scene from a life she might have had. A father visiting his son in the hospital. Ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of thing that happened in families that functioned the way families were supposed to function. She called her sous chef, Tomas. How's my boy? Tomas asked. Fever broke. They want one more night. Good. Listen, we're fine here. Rosa covered your station last night, and I've got the prep under control. Don't come in until he's home. You can't afford not to. He needs you there. We'll manage. Tomas, Sophia, stop. For once in your life, let someone else handle the kitchen. She hung up and stood in the hallway, pressing her phone against her forehead. She could feel the weight of everything. Eli's illness, Nathan's reappearance, the letter still folded in her bag. The 4 years of silence that had been neither silence nor absence, but something engineered and deliberate, a theft disguised as indifference. She thought about Margaret Holloway. She thought about the cease and desist letter that had arrived 6 months after the boys were born, when she was still recovering from the C-section and learning to breastfeed 3 infants and surviving on 4 hours of sleep a night. She thought about the specific language of that letter. My client has no desire to establish contact. And how she'd read it, standing in her kitchen in Glendale at 2 in the morning while all 3 boys screamed in the next room, and how she'd sat on the floor and put her head in her hands and stayed there until the screaming stopped, which was 45 minutes later, which felt like 45 years. She'd never told anyone about that night. Not her mother in Bakersfield, who had her own health problems and couldn't travel. Not Tomas, who would have shown up with food and fury and tried to fix something that couldn't be fixed. She'd carried it alone, and it had hardened into something inside her, a calcified resentment that she wore like a second skeleton, structural and invisible. And now she was being asked to consider the possibility that the man she'd hated for 4 years hadn't known. That he'd been as much a victim of Margaret Holloway's engineering as she had. That the monster she'd constructed in her mind, the cold, indifferent billionaire who'd thrown away his family like a bad investment, was actually something more complicated and more pathetic. A man who'd been so controlled by his own mother that he hadn't even noticed when his children disappeared from his life. She didn't know which version was worse. When she went back into the room, Eli was showing Nathan how Frank the elephant could balance on the bed railing if you wedged his feet just right. He falls, Eli said, demonstrating. Frank toppled onto the sheets. But I keep putting him back. Nathan looked at Sophia when she walked in. He's incredible, he said, and his voice cracked on the word in a way that was so uncharacteristic, so unlike anything she'd ever heard from this man, that she almost believed it. Almost. Can I talk to you? She said. Outside. They stood in the hallway a few feet apart, close enough to keep their voices low. Sophia could see into the room through the glass. Eli was arranging Frank on the pillow beside him, narrating something to the elephant in a voice too quiet to hear. I need to ask you something, Sophia said, and I need you to be honest, because I've had 4 years of lies, and I'm done. Ask me anything. If your mother hadn't intercepted those letters, if you'd known I was pregnant, what would you have done? Nathan didn't answer right away. She watched him think about it, really think about it, not reaching for the answer that sounded best, but digging for the one that was true. I don't know, he said finally. I want to tell you I would have come back. I want to tell you I would have been a different man. But the person I was 5 years ago, the person who let his mother run his marriage and signed divorce papers because it was easier than fighting, I don't know what that person would have done, and I think lying to you about it right now would be worse than the truth. Sophia stared at him. Of all the things he could have said, she hadn't expected honesty. She'd expected a performance, the contrition, the promises, the grand declarations that men like Nathan used the way they used money to buy their way out of consequences. Instead, he'd given her the most uncomfortable answer possible, the truth that he might have failed her even if he'd known. "Okay," she said. "Okay? That's the first honest thing you've ever said to me, including during our marriage." He flinched. She didn't soften it. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "Eli gets discharged tomorrow, and I take him home, and my 3 sons go back to the life I've built for them. A small life. A good life. A life that doesn't include helicopters or penthouse apartments or a grandmother who thinks they're a liability. I would never let my mother—" "You already did. For 4 years." He closed his mouth. "But—" She paused, and the word hung between them like a held breath. "The boys deserve to know who their father is. They deserve that, even if you don't. So here's what I'm offering. You can see them, supervised, at my apartment, on my schedule. You show up when I say. You leave when I say. You don't bring gifts that cost more than their monthly daycare. You don't make promises you can't keep. And the first time, the very first time, you don't show up when you say you will. We're done. No second chances. I understand. And Margaret doesn't come within a mile of my children, ever. That's not negotiable. It's not negotiable for me either. Not after what she did." Sophia searched his face for the lie, the performance, the angle. She was good at spotting those. Years in professional kitchens had taught her to read people fast, to tell the difference between a cook who was going to make it and one who was going to fold under pressure. Nathan looked like neither. He looked like a man standing on a ledge, not sure if the ground below would hold him. "Saturday," she said. 10 in the morning. I'll text you the address. Don't be early. Don't be late." "Saturday?" She turned to go back into Eli's room, then stopped. "Nathan." "Yeah." The elephant was a good choice. She went inside and closed the door, and Nathan stood in the hallway again, alone, looking at the door she hadn't locked. He didn't go back to Margaret's room. Instead, he found Derek in the hospital lobby, surrounded by 3 phones and a laptop, managing the controlled demolition of Nathan's calendar. "Fujimoto pulled out," Derek said. "His people called an hour ago. They're going with the Chen group." 6 hours ago, losing a $900 million deal would have sent Nathan into a strategic frenzy. Calls to lawyers, calls to brokers, calls to anyone who could stop the bleeding. Now he heard the words and felt nothing. Not even a flicker. "Fine," he said. Derek looked at him. "Fine? Nathan, this is the Wilshire parcel. We've been working on this for 18 months. I know what it is. Is your mother okay?" "My mother is the reason I'm in this situation. I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to clear my schedule for the rest of the month. Everything non-essential gets delegated. Board meetings, investor calls, site visits, all of it. Pass it to Daniels." "Daniels doesn't have the authority to—" "Then give him the authority. Draft whatever needs to be drafted. I'll sign it." Derek sat very still. He was 29 years old, ex-Goldman Sachs, hired specifically for his ability to remain calm in high-pressure situations. But this was not a high-pressure situation in the way he'd been trained for. This was his boss. The most methodical, most controlled, most strategically precise person he'd ever met, dismantling his own schedule with the casual certainty of a man who'd decided that none of it mattered. "Can I ask what's happening?" Derek said. "I have 3 sons I didn't know about. They're 4 years old. One of them is in this hospital right now. I missed everything. Their birth, their first words, their first steps, every single day of their lives. And I'm not missing any more." Derek closed his laptop. "What do you need from me?" "Saturday. I need you to find out what 4-year-old boys are interested in. Not expensive things, normal things, things a father would know. I'm not really an expert on, neither am I. That's the problem." Nathan left the hospital at 6 that evening. He drove himself, which he hadn't done in months, the Audi that usually sat in the underground garage of his building, while a driver took him where he needed to go. He drove through Los Angeles traffic with the windows down and the radio off, past billboards advertising developments his company had built, past neighborhoods where his name appeared on construction fences. past the physical evidence of a career that had consumed his 30s and left no room for anything else. He drove to Glendale. He didn't know the exact address yet, but he drove through the streets anyway, past apartment buildings with laundry hanging on balconies, past small restaurants with hand-painted signs, past a park where a group of kids were playing on a structure that needed new paint. This was Sophia's world. This was where she'd raised 3 children on a sous chef's salary, then a head chef's salary, in a 2-bedroom apartment that probably cost a fifth of what Nathan spent on his monthly dry cleaning. He parked on a quiet street and sat in the car. A woman walked by pushing a stroller with one hand and holding a grocery bag with the other, her phone clamped between her ear and her shoulder, talking fast in Spanish to someone who seemed to be giving her complicated instructions. She looked exhausted and competent, and like she'd done this exact thing 1,000 times before. Nathan wondered how many times Sophia had done the same thing. How many grocery runs with 3 kids in a cart? How many phone calls squeezed between nap time and meal prep? How many nights she'd sat alone after the boys fell asleep, in a quiet apartment, with no one to hand her a glass of wine and say, "You did a good job today." He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. He'd spent 4 years building an empire while his children grew up without him. Not because he'd chosen to, he understood that now, but because he'd built a life so insulated, so buffered by assistants and attorneys, and a mother who managed his personal world like a corporate portfolio that 3 entire human beings had been erased from it without leaving a trace. That was the part that wouldn't let go. Not Margaret's betrayal. That was monstrous, but it was hers. What belonged to Nathan was the architecture that had made it possible. The distance he'd built between himself and his own life. The way he'd outsourced everything personal until there was nothing personal left. He couldn't blame his mother for intercepting letters if he'd never once thought to ask why there were no letters to intercept. He drove home. The penthouse was dark and spotless. The housekeeper had been through. The kitchen gleamed. The living room furniture was arranged with geometric precision. Everything was in its place, and the silence was absolute. And for the first time, Nathan Holloway stood in the center of his 4,000-square-foot apartment and understood that he lived in the most expensive empty room in Los Angeles. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk with a glass of bourbon he didn't drink and opened his laptop and typed "Triplet Development Milestones Age 4" into a search engine and read for hours. About language development and motor skills and social behavior and the specific dynamics of identical multiples. He read about how triplets form micro-communities, how they develop their own communication patterns, how the smallest one often becomes the most observant. He read about Eli without knowing he was reading about Eli, and every paragraph was a door into a room he'd never been allowed to enter. At 4 a.m., he closed the laptop and opened the drawer of his desk. Inside was a photograph he hadn't looked at in years. His wedding photo with Sophia. They were standing outside the courthouse in Santa Monica, both of them laughing at something he couldn't remember. Sophia holding a bouquet of wildflowers she'd bought from a street vendor for $12. She was wearing a white sundress, not a gown. He was wearing a suit that cost more than her car. They looked happy in the specific way that people look happy when they don't yet know what's coming. Unguarded, slightly off balance, caught in the gravity of something bigger than either of them. He put the photograph on his desk, propped against the lamp where he'd see it every morning. Then he picked up the phone and called Leo. "It's 4 in the morning," Leo said. "She's letting me see them. Saturday, her apartment." "That's good, Nate. That's really good." "I don't know how to be a father." "Nobody does. You figure it out by showing up." "What if I'm terrible at it?" "You will be, at first, and then you'll get less terrible. That's how it works." Nathan sat in the dark with the phone against his ear and the photograph against the lamp and the city glittering outside his window. All those lights, all those buildings, all that glass and steel and ambition, and none of it worth a damn compared to a stuffed elephant named Frank and a 4-year-old boy who didn't know his father's name. "Leo," he said, "thank you. Go to sleep, Nate. Saturday's going to be the hardest day of your life." Nathan hung up. He didn't go to sleep. He sat at his desk and watched the sky lighten over Los Angeles. And he waited for Saturday the way a man waits for a verdict, terrified of the outcome, but unable to look away. Saturday arrived the way difficult days always do. Too fast and too slow at the same time, the morning stretching out in the apartment on Chevy Chase Drive, while Sophia made pancakes and tried not to think about what she'd agreed to, and the hours in the penthouse compressing into nothing while Nathan stood in front of his closet for 20 minutes trying to figure out what a person wore to meet their children for the first time. He settled on jeans and a blue Henley. Derek had called the night before with research. 4-year-old boys like building things, running, anything with wheels, and being taken seriously, and Nathan had written it down in his phone like field notes for a reconnaissance mission, which was the only framework he had for situations where the stakes were this high and the protocol was completely unknown. He drove himself to Glendale. He found parking a block away and sat in the car for 7 minutes, which was exactly the amount of time it took for him to accept that no amount of preparation was going to make this go smoothly, and that the only way through it was through it. The apartment building was a 3-story Spanish colonial with a courtyard fountain that had been turned off for the winter. Apartment 2C. He climbed the stairs slowly, not because his legs were tired, but because each step felt like a decision he couldn't take back. He knocked at 10 o'clock exactly. He heard them before the door opened, the crash and tumble of small bodies negotiating a narrow hallway, the elevated argument that seemed to be about who got to answer the door. "I got here first. You pushed me." "I didn't push you. I moved you." "That's the same thing." The door swung open and Oliver stood there, slightly out of breath, flushed from running, victorious. Behind him, Marcus crossed his arms with the dignity of a man who'd lost on a technicality. Eli hung back near the hallway entrance, Frank the elephant tucked under his arm, watching. Oliver looked Nathan up and down. "Are you Nathan?" "I am." "Mom said you were coming." He stepped aside with the authority of someone who'd decided this was fine on his own terms. "You can come in." The apartment was small. That was the first thing Nathan registered, not in a judgmental way, but in the way that made everything that followed sharper. The furniture was mismatched but deliberate, the kind of arrangement you arrived at after moving things around until it worked. There were drawings taped to the refrigerator, a row of small sneakers lined up imperfectly by the door, a kitchen that smelled like maple syrup and coffee, a plant on the windowsill that needed watering, crayon marks on the wall beside the light switch that hadn't quite been scrubbed off. It was the most alive room Nathan had been in for years. Sophia came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was wearing jeans and a green sweater, her hair down, and she looked different than she had in the hospital. Less armored, though the wariness was still there in the set of her jaw. "You're on time," she said. "You told me not to be late." "I told you not to be early either. I sat in the car for 7 minutes. Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, more like the recognition that he was trying. "Pancakes are on the counter if you want some." "Mom made too many," Marcus announced. "She always makes too many. She says it's because she's used to cooking for 50 people at work and can't cook small." "That's a reasonable problem," Nathan said. "We have to eat all of them or they go in the compost bin," and Marcus cries. "I don't cry," Marcus said hotly. "I express disappointment." "You cried last Tuesday." "Those were different emotions." Nathan sat at the kitchen table because that was where there was room, and because the table was where the boys naturally gravitated. Oliver pulling himself up onto a chair and reaching for a pancake with the unself-conscious confidence of someone who'd never once doubted his place in any room, Marcus settling in beside him, Eli taking the chair closest to his mother and placing Frank carefully on the table where he could see. It wasn't graceful. Nothing about it was. Nathan cut a pancake into pieces because that was what he saw Sophia doing for Eli, and then wasn't sure if that was condescending for a 4-year-old, and then decided to stop thinking about it. Marcus asked him if he was rich. Oliver asked him how tall his tallest building was. Eli ate his pancakes and watched everything and said nothing for a long time, and Nathan felt the weight of that watchfulness more than the other two combined. "What's your building made of?" Oliver asked. "Which one?" "The tallest one." "Steel and glass mostly, concrete for the frame." "Could it fall down?" "It's designed not to." "But could it?" "Everything could fall down if the wrong thing happened." Oliver appeared to find this philosophically satisfying. He moved on to asking whether Nathan had ever seen a building fall down for real, and Nathan said yes. A controlled demolition in Dallas, which he'd watched from a safe distance. And Oliver's eyes went wide in a way that made Nathan feel, for one disorienting moment, like the most interesting person in the world. He'd been interesting to a lot of people. Investors, journalists, people who wanted something from him. But none of them had ever looked at him the way Oliver did. Like, the interesting part wasn't his money or his buildings or his name, but just him, as an object of pure curiosity. He caught Sophia watching him from the kitchen counter. She looked away. The morning lasted 2 hours. At noon, Sophia said it was time for lunch and a rest, and Nathan understood that was his cue. He stood and pushed his chair back, and Oliver immediately grabbed his arm. "Are you coming back?" Oliver asked. Direct, as always. No preamble, no strategy. Just the question. "If your mom says it's okay," Nathan said. Oliver turned to Sophia. "Can he come back?" Sophia looked at Nathan over her son's head. "We'll see," she said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Nathan had made his living reading the gap between those two things, and he understood that right now, the gap was the only territory he had. He said goodbye to each of the boys in turn. Marcus gave him a handshake with the gravity of a small diplomat. Oliver had already moved on to something else and waved without looking up. Eli walked him to the door, which Sophia watched without interfering, and when Nathan crouched down to say goodbye, Eli held up Frank. "He liked you," Eli said. "Frank or you?" Eli considered. "Both." Nathan drove back to his apartment and sat on the couch and didn't move for an hour. The next Saturday he came back, and the one after that, and the one after that. The schedule Sophia had set, Saturdays, 10 to noon, her apartment, became the fixed point around which Nathan reorganized his weeks. He started clearing his Saturdays the way other people clear holidays, treating them as non-negotiable in a way that nothing in his professional life had ever been. Meetings that ran long on Fridays, he cut off. Calls that tried to migrate to the weekend, he rerouted. He built a wall around those 2 hours and defended it with the same determination he'd once reserved for closing deals. By the fourth Saturday, Oliver had started calling him Nathan without the slight formality he'd used at first. By the sixth, Marcus had informed him at length about every episode of a cartoon Nathan had never seen and would never have chosen to watch. And Nathan had gone home that night and watched all 14 available episodes on his laptop so he could follow the conversation the following week. Eli was slower. Eli watched and withheld, the way careful children do, testing the pattern of arrivals and departures before committing any part of himself to it. Nathan understood that. It was the most painful understanding of his life. 6 weeks in, Sophia made coffee for him. She hadn't before. He'd always politely declined anything that would extend the visit beyond what she'd sanctioned, understanding instinctively that the 2 hours mattered less than the consistency, and that any push for more would damage what was carefully, slowly being built. But this time, she just poured a second cup while she was pouring her own and set it on the table, and Nathan accepted it without comment. They sat at the kitchen table while the boys argued about something in the living room, a disagreement about the structural integrity of a block tower that Marcus had built, and Oliver had opinions about. And the coffee was strong, the way Sophia had always made it, and Nathan wrapped his hands around the mug and watched her face. "The restaurant got reviewed," she said. "The Times did a piece on chef-owned places in Glendale. They mentioned us." "Good review?" "Good enough. We've been fully booked every night since. I had to hire another server, and we still can't seat everyone." She said it without the satisfaction the news warranted, the way people who've been scraping report good news, cautiously, like saying it too loud might jinx it. "That's not good enough," Nathan said. "That's enormous. What's the restaurant?" "Fennel and Sage, on Brand Boulevard." "How long have you had it?" 2 years. I was sous chef at Marisol for 3 years before that, and I saved everything I could, and a small business loan covered the rest." She wrapped her own hands around her mug. "It almost didn't happen. The loan almost fell through. I had a restaurant equipment supplier who kept pushing back the installation date. The first 6 months were the worst, but it's starting to work." Nathan thought about what Leo had told him. A 2-bedroom apartment, a restaurant loan, 3 children, no support. The math of that life was staggering, not because the numbers were big, but because of how precisely she must have managed every one of them, every week, with no margin for error. "You built something real," he said. "I didn't have a choice. I had 3 people depending on me. A lot of people in that situation don't build anything. They survive. You built." Sophia looked at him. It wasn't a soft look. There was too much history between them for soft. But it was direct. And direct from Sophia was its own kind of intimacy. Is that your way of paying me a compliment? Yes. It's a little backhanded. I'm out of practice. She almost smiled. Not quite. But close enough that he filed it away. The way he filed away everything from these Saturday mornings, building a map of who she was now, because the woman in this apartment was not the woman he'd married, and he was done pretending she was. The crash from the living room was followed by a silence that was somehow louder than the crash, which every parent recognizes as the silence of a child deciding whether to cry. A beat, then Marcus's voice. Oliver, you did that on purpose. It was structurally unsound. It was going to fall anyway. I was just illustrating physics. You kicked it. I nudged it. For science. Sophia stood up. Oliver Bennett, if you nudged that tower for any reason, it was about to fall, Mom. Were you asked for your opinion on structural integrity? No, but did Marcus ask for a physics lesson? No. Then what do we do? A pause. Apologize and help rebuild? And a longer pause. Not touch other people's things. Sophia walked back to the kitchen with the authority of someone who'd had this conversation 17 times and knew exactly where each beat of it landed. Nathan watched the whole exchange from the table, and the particular quality of competence he saw, not perfect, not patient in the way parenting books describe patience, but real and practiced and effective, made something ache in his chest. He'd missed 4 years of her becoming this person. He'd missed watching her figure out how to raise 3 children at once, how to run a restaurant, how to hold a whole complicated life together with her bare hands. He'd been in boardrooms and helicopters and conference calls, building something that looked impressive from a distance and meant nothing up close, while she'd been building something that looked ordinary and was actually extraordinary. You're good at this, he said when she came back. At what? All of it. She sat down. She looked tired in the specific way she always looked tired. Functional, not defeated. The tiredness of someone who chose to keep going because the alternative wasn't an option. Don't romanticize it. Half the time I have no idea what I'm doing. I gave Eli cereal for dinner last Tuesday because I didn't have energy to cook. I forgot to sign Oliver's permission slip for his school trip, and he missed the planetarium visit. Marcus went 4 days without a bath last month because by the time I got everyone else sorted, I just ran out of steam. That's still doing it. That's barely doing it. No, Nathan said. Barely doing it looks like not doing it. What you're describing is doing it imperfectly, which is what everyone does. The ones who say otherwise are lying. Sophia looked at him for a moment. When did you get a philosophy degree? I've been reading. About what? Parenthood, child development, triplets specifically. He said it without embarrassment because there was no room left in him for the kind of pride that would make this moment about how he looked. I know more about sibling dynamics and multiples than I ever expected to know. I also know what the 3 main rivalry triggers are for same-age boys, and why Marcus probably engineers situations where he gets to be the reasonable one. Sophia stared at him. He absolutely does that. It's because he was in the middle of the birth order. Eli's the careful one, Oliver leads, and Marcus realized early that being the peacemaker gets you positive attention without having to be first or most responsible. It's smart. He's running a social strategy at 4. You figured that out from reading? I figured that out from watching for 6 weeks and then reading to confirm what I was seeing. Sophia set down her mug. She looked at the table. She looked at the wall. She looked at any surface that wasn't Nathan's face, which told him something was shifting inside her that she wasn't ready to name. The National Culinary Competition, she said abruptly. What about it? There's a competition. Regional first, then national. It's called the Marchetti Series, Italian-American Culinary Tradition. It's been running for 20 years. The regional is in San Francisco next month, and if I place in the top 3, I go to the national final in New York in the spring. She pulled at the sleeve of her sweater. Tomas submitted my name without asking. I found out 2 weeks ago I was accepted to compete. Sophia, that's huge. It's a month away and it's a 3-day competition, and I'd have to leave the boys and there's no one to... She stopped. She pressed her lips together. I wasn't going to bring this up. Why not? Because asking you for anything isn't something I'm prepared to do yet. You're not asking. You're telling me. There's a difference. Nathan, I'll stay with them. She looked at him. 3 days, he said. I'll stay here. Your apartment, whatever the boys need. You've seen them 6 times, for 2 hours each time. In a supervised setting, that's a very different thing from 3 days and 3 nights in charge of 3 4-year-olds. I know. Oliver will test every limit you have. Marcus will play you against yourself. Eli will shut down if he doesn't feel safe. I know. You will not be able to manage them the way you manage people at your office. It doesn't work like that. I understand. You think you understand, Sophia said. You don't. Not yet. Then let me find out. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard below. The dry fountain, the bougainvillea climbing the stucco wall, the ordinary evidence of an ordinary neighborhood that was not the world Nathan Holloway came from. This isn't a test, she said. I know. It's not an audition. I know. If you fail at this, if you panic or you mess something up, or Eli gets upset and you don't know how to handle it, I'm not holding it against you. But I need you to tell me right now, honestly, if you're not ready. Because my boys have already had enough disappointment, I will not pile more of it on them. Nathan stood up too. He crossed the room and stopped a few feet away from her, not because he was going to touch her, he wasn't, he understood where those lines were, but because this conversation deserved to happen face to face, without a table between them. I have missed 4 years of everything, he said. I have missed their first words, their first steps, their first day of school, every birthday, every fever, every time any one of them cried in the night. I cannot get that back. There's no amount of money, no attorney, no strategy that gives me a single day of that time back. All I have is what's in front of me, and I am telling you that I will not waste it. He paused. I'm not asking you to trust me completely. I'm asking you to trust me enough to let me try. Sophia looked at him for a long time. The apartment was quiet. From the living room came the soft sound of blocks being stacked. Marcus rebuilding what Oliver had knocked down, with Oliver, apparently, assisting as penance. The competition is in 5 weeks, Sophia said, which means you have 5 weeks to prove to me, and more importantly to those boys, that Saturday mornings are a pattern they can count on. Not a favor, not an event, a pattern. 5 weeks. And you stop delegating everything to Derek. The boys don't know Derek. They know you. Done. She turned back to the window. The guest rules still apply. You're there for them, not to impress me, not to make up for lost time, not to perform what a father looks like. You're just there. Just there, Nathan said. That's all I want to be. He left at noon, as always. But this time when he got to his car, he sat behind the wheel and called his office directly. Not Derek, but his operations director, a sharp woman named Carmen who had been running Holloway Group's day-to-day for 7 years with almost no recognition. Carmen, he said, I need you to take point on everything for the next 2 months. Full operational authority. If something needs my signature, Derek will handle the relay. But the judgment calls, those are yours. Carmen was quiet for 3 full seconds. Nathan, are you okay? I'm better than I've been in years. I just have somewhere more important to be. He hung up and drove back toward the freeway, and as he merged into traffic, he thought about Eli and Frank the elephant, and about Oliver's unsettling architectural opinions, and about Marcus running his quiet social strategies, and he felt something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten its name. Purpose. Specific and unambiguous and not for sale at any price. The 5 weeks passed the way crucial time passes, faster than you want and slower than you can stand. Every Saturday waited with more than the last. Nathan arrived each time with coffee for Sophia from a bakery around the corner that she'd mentioned once, offhandedly, made the only decent cup in Glendale. He didn't make a production of it. He just brought it, and eventually she stopped saying she didn't need it and started having the door open before he knocked. He learned things. He learned that Oliver needed a physical outlet within the first 30 minutes, or the energy compacted into something less manageable. He learned that Marcus responded to direct, honest conversation better than any redirection strategy. That if you told him plainly what you needed from him, he met you there, because being treated like a competent person was his primary currency. He learned that Eli's silence wasn't rejection. It was data collection, and the day Eli showed him a drawing he'd made, a building, tall and angular, with 3 small figures standing in front of it, Nathan understood that the acceptance he'd been waiting for didn't announce itself. It just appeared, quietly, when you'd stopped looking. The drawing went on Nathan's refrigerator, the penthouse refrigerator which had previously been a cold white surface holding nothing. 3 Saturdays before the competition, Sophia told the boys that Nathan was going to stay with them while she traveled for work. She said it matter-of-factly, at the dinner table. Nathan was there, at her invitation, for the first time past noon, and she watched their faces with the vigilance of a woman who knew exactly how each child processed unexpected information. Oliver said, "Okay, can I show him the thing in the backyard?" Marcus said, "Will you make pancakes? Mom makes too many, but she does the shapes, and you have to do shapes." Eli looked at Nathan across the table. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Will Frank be there?" "Frank lives here," Nathan said. "I'll be wherever Frank is." Eli nodded once. That was his yes. Sophia looked at her plate. Nathan saw her jaw move, the swallow, the controlled exhale, the look of a woman holding something back that she'd spent too long holding back to release easily. That night, after the boys were in bed and the apartment was quiet, Nathan stayed to help with the dishes because Sophia had cooked, and that was a rule in her kitchen. Whoever didn't cook cleaned up. She washed, he dried, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was its own kind of conversation. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Of the competition?" "Of leaving." She handed him a pot to dry. "Terrified. Because of the boys or because of me?" She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to answer questions anymore. "Both. And also because I haven't done something for myself, just for myself, not for the restaurant, not for the boys, in longer than I can remember. And I'm not sure I remember how to want something without a backup plan." "You don't need a backup plan. Everyone needs a backup plan. Not this time." He put the pot away in the cabinet where she kept it. He knew where she kept it because he'd been paying attention for 5 weeks. "This time, you go and you compete and you cook the best food you've ever cooked, and the boys will be here when you get back." Sophia rinsed the last dish. She turned off the faucet. She stood at the sink with her wet hands and looked at the wall where the boys' drawings were taped, and for a long time she didn't say anything. "I used to dream about this competition," she said. "When I was still cooking at the Marisol, before I had the restaurant, it was the thing I thought about on my breaks, like a version of myself that I kept in reserve in case the regular version ever got a chance to rest." She dried her hands. "And then I got pregnant, and I put it away. Not permanently, I told myself, just for now. But for now has a way of becoming forever if you stop guarding the door. You're guarding it now." "I'm trying to." "Then go," Nathan said. "I'll be here." She turned to look at him. The kitchen light was poor. One of the bulbs had been out for a week, and she hadn't had time to replace it. And in the half-dark, she looked the way she used to look at the end of a long evening when they were married, before everything fractured. Tired and real and completely herself. "Nathan?" She said it carefully, like a word that could break things. "Whatever is happening here, whatever this is, it can't be undone. Not by lawyers, not by apologies, not by you being good with the boys. You understand that." "I understand." "I mean the 4 years. I mean what was taken from me. From them." Her voice held. "I'm not asking you to fix it. You can't. I just need to know that you know that, so I don't have to spend the next 20 years watching your face for signs that you've forgotten what it cost." "I won't forget," he said. "I promise I won't forget." It wasn't enough. They both knew it. A promise was just words, and words were what she'd been deceived with, and the only proof worth anything would have to be built over years, not evenings. But she nodded, because the promise was the beginning, and beginnings had to start somewhere. She went to bed. Nathan let himself out and locked the door. She'd given him a key 3 Saturdays ago, for emergencies only, and walked down the stairs to the courtyard and stood by the dry fountain in the dark. His phone had 22 unread messages. He put it back in his pocket. He drove home slowly. At a stoplight, he watched a couple cross the street holding hands, arguing about something. The woman gesturing expressively, the man laughing in spite of himself. They didn't look like people who'd gotten everything right. They looked like people in the middle of it, carrying things, working things out, which was what love actually looked like, stripped of the version that got sold to people. He thought about Sophia in 5 weeks, standing in a competition kitchen in San Francisco, cooking the food she'd been putting off loving for 4 years. He thought about Eli with Frank the elephant, and Oliver with his architectural opinions, and Marcus running his quiet, brilliant social strategies in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like maple syrup and coffee. He thought about the drawing on his refrigerator, the tall building, the 3 small figures, the careful lines of a boy who noticed everything and said very little. By the time Nathan got home, he'd made a list in his head. Not a business list, not a strategy, just the things he needed to know before Sophia left. The boys' bedtime routines, their food preferences, their fears, their tells when something was wrong. The pediatrician's number, the name of Eli's specialist, which lamp had to stay on in the hallway or Marcus couldn't sleep, whether Oliver's tantrums responded better to distraction or direct confrontation, what Eli did when he felt unsafe, and how long it took him to come back. He needed to know his own sons. That was the list. He sat at his desk with a notepad and wrote for an hour, and the notes were messy and incomplete and nothing like the clean documents he produced for billion-dollar transactions, and they were the most important thing he'd ever written in his life. Sophia left on a Thursday morning at 6:15, which was earlier than the boys woke up, and that was deliberate. She'd said her goodbyes the night before, tucking each of them in with the extra time she rarely had on school nights, sitting on the edge of each bed long enough that they'd feel it in the morning when she wasn't there. She'd told them she was going to cook in a big competition, that Nathan would be with them, that she'd call every night. Oliver had said cool and asked if she'd win. Marcus had asked if he could have her phone while she was gone. Eli had held her hand for a while without saying anything, and when she stood to leave, he'd said, "Come back fast." And she'd said, "I will, baby. I promise." She'd cried in the car briefly on the way to the airport. Then she'd stopped, because there was no space for it in the 3 days ahead, and she needed everything she had. Nathan arrived at the apartment at 6:30. He let himself in with the key, the emergency key, now also the staying with the boys key, and stood in the quiet for a moment. The apartment smelled like the coffee Sophia had made before she left, still faintly warm in the pot. Her jacket was gone from the hook by the door. Frank the elephant was on the couch, which meant Eli had left him there deliberately, like a sentry. He put his bag in the corner of the living room because there was nowhere else to put it. The couch pulled out into a bed. He'd tested it the week before when Sophia showed him how it worked, and it was approximately as comfortable as sleeping on a geology sample. But he'd said nothing because that wasn't the point. He made breakfast before the boys woke up. This was a specific decision. He'd thought about it on the drive over. The morning rhythm Sophia ran, the way she had breakfast ready before they came out, because hungry 4-year-olds interacting with an uncertain situation were a variable he didn't want to manage. He made scrambled eggs, which he was moderately good at, and toast, which he could not ruin. And he cut the toast into triangles because Eli, Sophia had told him, refused toast that was cut into rectangles. The reason for this was unclear, possibly even to Eli, but it was a rule, and Nathan followed it. Oliver appeared first, as always. He came out of the bedroom in dinosaur pajamas with his hair flattened on one side, stopped in the kitchen doorway, and looked at Nathan with the frank assessment of a child running diagnostics. "You're making eggs," Oliver said. "I am. Mom puts cheese in them." "There's cheese in these." Oliver appeared satisfied. He climbed onto his chair. "Where's the juice?" "In the fridge." "Can you get it?" "Can you get it?" Oliver looked at him for a second, recalibrating. Then he got up and got the juice himself, which Sophia had told Nathan was the correct response. Oliver would always ask for things that were within his own reach if no one pushed back. Not out of laziness, but out of testing. The pushback wasn't discipline. It was information. It told Oliver what kind of person he was dealing with. Marcus came out next, assessed the situation more slowly, and asked whether Nathan knew how Sophia set the table. Nathan said he didn't and asked Marcus to show him, which Marcus did with the quiet pleasure of someone given legitimate authority. Eli came last, trailing his blanket, and looked at the table and then at Nathan and then at the toast cut into triangles, and something in his face settled. He sat down without a word and started eating. They had breakfast. It was not elegant, Oliver knocked over his juice and Nathan cleaned it up without making a production of it, which Oliver watched carefully. Marcus wanted to know if Nathan had brought his car and whether Nathan's car was nicer than the car that belonged to their neighbor, Mr. Caldwell, which Marcus described as old and it makes a noise like it's tired. Eli finished his eggs, fed a small piece of toast to Frank under the table when he thought no one was looking, and then asked very quietly if they could call Mom. "She's probably on the plane right now," Nathan said, "but we can try after school." "Okay," Eli said. School was the first real test. The drop-off at Pinewood Preschool on Central Avenue involved a parking situation that Nathan had underestimated, a bag mix-up that resulted in Marcus arriving at drop-off with Oliver's backpack, and a conversation with a teacher named Ms. Yolanda, who looked at Nathan with the particular careful neutrality of an educator meeting a previously absent father for the first time. She said, "We've heard a lot about Nathan," which could have meant several things and probably meant all of them. Oliver ran into the building without looking back. Marcus stopped to pat Nathan on the arm in what appeared to be a gesture of encouragement before following. Eli stopped at the door and turned around. "You'll be here at 3?" Eli asked. "At 3, Nathan said. "I'll be right here." Eli nodded and went inside. Nathan sat in the car for a few minutes after that. He sat there thinking about how much was contained in those 4 words, "I'll be here at 3. And how 4-year-old Eli had been counting on people to show up for 4 years, and how his mother had always been there, without fail, and how Nathan was now asking to be counted in that category, and how the only way to be counted was to be there at 3. He was there at 3. He was there at 2:50, in fact, standing outside the gate in the pickup line behind a woman with a double stroller and a man who was on his phone arguing about something that sounded like a contract dispute, and he watched the door with the focus he usually reserved for closing meetings. Oliver came out first and immediately started describing something that had happened at lunch involving a crackers and hummus incident that he'd had no part in, officially. Marcus came out explaining that he'd received a compliment from Miss Yolanda on his sharing, which he reported with the modesty of a man accepting an award he'd been expecting. Eli came out last, found Nathan in the line, and walked directly to him. "You came," Eli said. "I said I would." "I know." A pause. "I just wanted to check." The 3 days moved the way things move when you're paying absolute attention. Slowly in the moment, fast in retrospect. Nathan learned things that no amount of reading could have taught him. He learned that Oliver's anger burned hot and fast and was over in 4 minutes if you didn't escalate it, and that the worst thing you could do was try to reason with him in the middle of it. You just had to wait and then talk after. He learned that Marcus's negotiations, which initially looked like manipulation, were actually a genuine attempt to find solutions that worked for everyone, and that if you honored that instinct instead of shutting it down, he'd usually arrive at a fair outcome on his own. He learned that Eli needed about 10 minutes of quiet when he got home from school. Not isolation, just decompression, space to downshift from the noise of a classroom. And that if you gave him those 10 minutes without pressure or conversation, he came out of them ready to engage. He learned these things by getting them wrong first. The first evening, he pushed Oliver to talk about why he was upset about something at dinner before Oliver was ready, and Oliver went from manageable to full-scale meltdown in 30 seconds, and Nathan stood in the kitchen not knowing what to do while Oliver cried on the living room floor, and eventually Marcus walked over to his brother, sat down beside him, and said, "Oliver, you're okay. Stop." And Oliver, inexplicably, did. Marcus looked up at Nathan with an expression that said, "This is how it works. You're welcome." He got better. He was not good, not in those 3 days, but he got incrementally better, which was all the project called for. Sophia called each night at 8, after the boys were in bed. The first night she sounded tightly wound. The competition's first day had been a technique round, and she'd done well, but not as well as she'd wanted. And she was in her hotel room doing the specific kind of second-guessing that happens when you've been inside your own head for 16 hours. "How are they?" she asked. "Good. Oliver had a meltdown at dinner. I handled it wrong, and Marcus fixed it. Eli ate all his vegetables, which I'm told is rare. Marcus informed me at bedtime that I read the story wrong and I need to do different voices. I've been practicing." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "He told you that?" "He was very specific. Apparently I'm doing the rabbit's voice too high. It should be medium high." That's, yeah, that's accurate. A pause. How are you doing? I'm sleeping on a couch bed that I think was assembled from leftover building materials. I'm fine. She laughed. It was real. The laugh she'd always had, the kind that surprised her when it came out. Nathan held on to it. How was today, really? He asked. Hard. The first dish didn't come together the way I'd planned it in my head. The timing was off and I had to adjust mid-execution, and it worked, but it wasn't. It wasn't what I knew it could be. Tomorrow it'll be closer. You don't know that. No, but you do. You've been cooking for 20 years. The dish you couldn't finish today is the one you're going to dream about tonight and fix in your sleep. Another pause. Longer. That's either really wise or really annoying. Probably both. Probably, she agreed. The second night she called at 8 again, and her voice was different, quieter, with a quality in it he recognized as contained excitement, the way people sound when something has gone right and they don't trust it yet. Second day was better, she said. What changed? I stopped trying to cook the dish I'd planned and started cooking what I actually knew. The judges didn't know what I'd planned. They only know what I put in front of them. She paused. Tomas told me that once. I think I finally understood it today. What did you make? She told him. She told him about this braised short rib with preserved lemon gremolata, the handmade pasta cut to a width she'd been perfecting for 2 years, the sauce built from scratch with techniques she'd learned during the 3 months she'd stage in a restaurant in Bologna right out of culinary school, before she had anything or anyone, when she was just a girl from Bakersfield who could cook and refused to believe that wasn't enough. She talked for 20 minutes about food, about the specific decisions she'd made, about the moment she'd tasted the sauce and known it was right, and Nathan listened to all of it and found that he had no desire to be anywhere else. That sounds like the best thing I've never eaten, he said. It might have been. She was smiling as he could hear it. Nathan, thank you for being there. I know that seems like a small thing to... It's not a small thing. No, she said. It's not. Eli asked to talk to her after that. Nathan brought him the phone, and Eli sat on the couch with Frank and told his mother in careful, precise detail about his day, the crackers incident, which had apparently affected the whole classroom, the voices Nathan was doing wrong, and the fact that Nathan had made dinner 2 nights in a row and neither time had anyone gotten sick, which Eli reported as a positive development. Sophia laughed so hard at that last part that Nathan heard it from across the room. The third day was the hardest. Not because anything went wrong, because things went right, and rightness, Nathan was learning, carried its own weight. In the morning, while Marcus and Oliver were still asleep, Eli came and found him on the pull-out couch at 6:30. Nathan was awake, had been awake for an hour, lying on the improbable mattress thinking about nothing in particular. You're awake, Eli said. Can't sleep past 6, bad habit. Eli climbed up onto the couch without asking and settled himself with the unconscious ease of a child who'd decided a space was safe. He brought Frank. The 3 of them, Nathan, Eli, Frank, sat in the early morning quiet with the gray light coming through the curtains, and Eli asked in his serious, unhurried way, Are you our dad? Nathan's chest tightened. He'd known this was coming. He'd been preparing for it, the way you prepare for something you can't actually prepare for, by deciding you'd tell the truth, whatever shape it came in. Yes, he said. I am. Why weren't you here before? I didn't know you existed. I should have. That was a mistake. Not yours, not your mom's, mine and some other people's. But I didn't know. And when I found out, I came. Eli thought about this for a while. He turned Frank over in his hands, examining the ears the way he always did when he was processing. Oliver said maybe you didn't want us, Eli said. Not accusatory, just informational, reporting what he'd heard. Oliver is wrong about that. I very much want you, all 3 of you. I just found out I had you. Nathan paused. Are you okay with that answer? I'm thinking about it, Eli said. Take your time. They sat there together for another 20 minutes. Eli didn't say anything else about it, but he also didn't leave, and at some point he leaned sideways until his shoulder was against Nathan's arm, and Nathan held very still and didn't make a thing of it, and that was the most important 20 minutes of the 3 days. Sophia came back on Sunday evening. She'd placed second in the regional. The winner was a chef from San Francisco who had 20 more years of experience in a restaurant with 2 Michelin stars, and Sophia had beaten out 11 other competitors for second place, which meant she was going to the national final in New York in the spring. She walked in the door with her rolling bag and her competition jacket still over her arm and dark circles under her eyes, and Oliver launched himself at her from 6 feet away, and she caught him without stumbling, which said something about the core strength required to be the mother of 3 active boys. Marcus got his hug in with the decorum he brought to all important events. Eli waited, and when it was his turn, he just pressed his face against her shoulder and stayed there, and Sophia held the back of his head with one hand and closed her eyes. Nathan stood near the hallway. He'd ordered dinner from a Thai place 2 blocks away that Sophia had mentioned she liked, and it was on the table in containers, and the apartment was mostly clean, and the boys were bathed, which had taken longer than anything else in the 3 days combined. Sophia looked at him over Eli's head. "Second place," he said. "Second place," she confirmed. Her voice held a particular quality, not disappointment, not satisfaction, but something that lived between them. The quality of a person who knows what they're capable of and knows the distance still left to close. "Spring," he said. "New York." "Spring, New York." She shifted Eli to her hip, which was probably not easy with a 4-year-old, but she managed it. "The apartment's not destroyed. It's mostly intact. There's a crayon situation on the bathroom wall that I've been meaning to address. That was there before you." "Oh, good." Marcus had found the Thai food and was reporting its contents to Oliver in the tone of a sommelier presenting a wine list. Oliver appeared to be reserving judgment until he could see for himself. Eli had relocated from Sophia's hip to the couch and was showing Frank the elephant the takeout bag. Nathan moved to get plates because that was the practical thing to do, and also because he needed something to do with his hands. Sophia watched him open the right cabinet on the first try, watched him set the table the way Marcus had shown him, watched him navigate her kitchen with the specific ease of someone who'd been paying attention. "The boys told me things," she said quietly, while Oliver and Marcus argued about chopsticks. "What kind of things?" "Oliver said you didn't yell when he cried. Marcus said you asked his opinion about dinner, which apparently no one has ever done." She paused. "Eli said you told him the truth." Nathan put down the stack of plates. "He asked." "I know. I'm glad you told him." She came closer, lowered her voice further. "What exactly did you tell him?" "The truth. That I didn't know. That I found out and came. That I want to be here." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen light was still missing the one bulb. He'd bought a replacement the second day and then not gotten to it, and now he remembered it and made a mental note. She looked tired and real and like someone who'd just competed for 3 days and come in second and still had to feed 3 children and fold laundry and be present for a conversation that required her full attention. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay." While I was in San Francisco, I got a call from a journalist, a woman named Claire Sutton from the Chronicle. She said she was working on a piece about the Marchetti competition, but the questions she was asking weren't about the competition. Sophia's voice was careful, measured. She asked whether I was the Sophia Bennett who had been married to Nathan Holloway. She asked about the triplets. She asked whether Nathan was involved in the children's lives, and whether there had been any legal disputes over paternity. Nathan went still. "She had details," Sophia continued, "specific ones. She knew about the hospital. She knew Eli had been admitted. She knew Nathan had been visiting the apartment." Sophia's eyes met his directly. "Someone fed her this story, Nathan. Someone who knows the details." Nathan's mind moved fast. The hospital, staff, visitors, anyone who'd seen him outside room 716. Derek, who knew everything and was loyal but not infallible. His own office, where the cleared calendar and the delegated authority had raised questions he hadn't answered clearly. And Margaret, who was recovering from her biopsy. Benign, as it turned out, which should have been a relief, but had been almost a footnote next to everything else, and who had not been idle since Nathan had walked out of her hospital room. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "I said I had no comment, and I hung up." "Good. But Nathan, if this goes public, It's going to go public eventually. I've known that. He said it without the panic she'd expected. The question is whether we get to tell the story ourselves or whether someone else tells it wrong. I don't want my children in a newspaper. Neither do I. Then what do we do? He thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about problems that didn't have clean solutions, not looking for the perfect answer, but for the least bad set of options. I have a contact at a legal firm that specializes in media and privacy. We get ahead of it. We don't make a statement, but we establish that any reporting needs to go through proper channels. We make it too complicated for a quick hit piece. And your mother? He'd been waiting for that question. I'll handle my mother. That's not an answer? No, it's a statement of intent. He looked at her directly. She doesn't get to do this again. Whatever she's done, whatever she's told whoever, it stops. I will make that clear to her in terms she understands. Sophia studied him. You've never stood up to her before. I know. What's different? He looked at the table where his sons were now in active negotiation over the distribution of pad thai, at the apartment that smelled like Sophia's cooking and children and ordinariness, at the drawing on his refrigerator at home, the building, the three figures. And he said, everything. He left after dinner. But the journalist problem didn't leave with him. 3 days later, Leo called. I've been doing some digging, Leo said. The Claire Sutton inquiry didn't come from nowhere. Someone tipped her. I can't prove it yet, but the detail about Eli's hospitalization, that's too specific for a random leak. That's someone who is inside the building. Or someone who has a contact inside the building. Nathan, your mother's attorney, the one who handled the cease and desist 4 years ago, his firm has a connection to the Sutton woman's editor. They've done PR work for some of the same clients. Nathan sat at his desk. The photograph of him and Sophia was still propped against the lamp. He'd stopped seeing it consciously, which was how he knew it had become necessary. The things you stop seeing are the things you need. She's trying to get ahead of it, Nathan said. If the story breaks on her terms, if Sophia looks like someone who concealed children, or if I look like someone who found out and is trying to buy his way back in, it shifts the narrative. Exactly. She knows you're going to go public eventually. She's trying to shape the version you go public with. What do I need to do? You need to talk to her before she does anything else, and you need to do it in person, not through attorneys. Nathan drove to his mother's house in Bel Air on a Wednesday evening. He hadn't been there since before the hospital. Hadn't called? Hadn't sent a message? Margaret had tried twice. He hadn't answered. He'd needed the space between what he'd learned and this conversation, and he'd taken it, but the space was used up now. The house was as it had always been, white Georgian, perfectly maintained, the kind of property that made real estate photographers weep with professional gratitude. He parked in the circular drive and rang the bell because knocking on his mother's door with his key felt wrong now in a way it hadn't before. Margaret opened it herself. She was dressed as always, not for him specifically, but because she was always dressed. She looked at him for a moment, then stepped aside. They went to her study, which was where serious conversations happened in this house. She poured herself a glass of water. She didn't offer him one. You've been speaking to journalists, Nathan said. Margaret set down the glass. I've been protecting you. You've been protecting your position, which is different. The story is going to come out, Nathan. It was always going to come out. I'd rather it come out correctly than as some tabloid piece about a billionaire's secret children. They're not secret children. They're my children. And the only reason anyone would frame it as secret is because you made them a secret. Margaret's composure held. It always held, the training of a lifetime. But he saw something move behind her eyes. Not regret. Not yet. Something that might become regret if she let it. What I did for your career, for the Holloway name. You were 32 years old, and you just married a woman who was completely unsuitable for the life. You say that like it's a fact. It's your opinion. It was always just your opinion, and you turned it into policy without my consent. Nathan's voice was level. He wasn't shouting, he was past shouting. You took 4 years from me, 4 years of my son's lives, and now you're calling journalists to protect yourself from the consequences of that. And I'm telling you, if you do that again, if you interfere again in any way, I will make everything public. All of it. The letters, the cease and desist, The calls you made. All of it, my way, with my story. Margaret looked at him. You would do that to me? To our family? You did it first, Mom. You did it to 3 children who didn't get a choice. The silence was long. Margaret sat down in her chair. Not the controlled placement of a woman in command, but the slow drop of someone whose legs had stopped cooperating. She looked smaller than she had in the hospital, more like 71. I don't know how to tell you I'm sorry, she said finally. I don't have that language. I know. It doesn't mean I'm not. Nathan looked at his mother, at the woman who'd held his hand at his father's funeral, who'd pushed him through every door he'd ever walked through, who'd built a shell around their family so thick and so well-engineered that love and damage had become indistinguishable inside it. I'm not asking you to be sorry, he said. I'm asking you to stop. That's all. Stop interfering, stop controlling, stop running calculations on people you've decided don't fit the spreadsheet. Sophia is the mother of my children. Oliver, Marcus, and Eli are your grandchildren. That's the reality. You can be part of it or you can't, but that decision is mine and Sophia's to make, not yours. Margaret's jaw was tight. She'll never let me near them. That depends on you. Not me. Not Sophia. You. He stood. I'm not asking you to grovel. I'm not asking you to perform remorse. I'm asking you to decide right now whether you're going to be in this family's life or not. And I'm telling you that if you are, the rules are mine. He left her sitting in her study with her glass of water and her immaculate house and the particular silence of a woman confronting the full cost of being right about everything for too long. The journalist piece ran 2 weeks later. It wasn't the hit piece Nathan had feared. The media attorney had done his job, and what appeared was a brief item in a society column noting that Nathan Holloway had been seen in Glendale on several occasions visiting a woman with 3 children. It was vague, speculative, and generated exactly 3 days of internet interest before something else replaced it. But 3 days was enough for some people. His board raised questions, quietly, through intermediaries, in the polite language of corporate governance that meant exactly what it meant. A competitor floated a rumor that Nathan's distraction from the Wilshire deal was personal, and the rumor reached investors. One of his limited partners sent an inquiry through his attorney asking whether Nathan's personal situation was going to affect the portfolio. Nathan called a board meeting. He sat at the head of the table in the Holloway Group conference room, and he told them everything. Not the private details, but the structural facts. He had 3 children he'd recently become involved with. He was reorganizing his schedule to be present for them. He had delegated operational authority to Carmen, who had been running the company competently for 7 years without sufficient recognition, and who would continue to do so. The company's performance was unchanged. His personal life was not a liability to anyone in this room, and if anyone believed otherwise, he was prepared to buy out their position at a premium because he had no interest in having his family turned into a negotiation point. Nobody took him up on it. The room was quiet for a moment, and then his CFO, a pragmatic woman named Rubin, who'd seen 3 market crashes and 2 recessions and had the unflappable quality of someone who'd outlasted everything, said, "So Carmen gets the title to go with the work?" And Nathan said yes, and the meeting moved on. After it ended, his longest-serving board member, a retired developer named Paul Chen, who'd known Nathan since he was 25, stopped him in the hallway. "Your father would have done the same thing," Paul said. Nathan looked at him. "Which part?" "All of it. The meeting. The kids." Paul shrugged. "Your father was terrified of your mother too, but he chose her anyway. Every day he chose her. It was the best and worst thing about him." Nathan thought about that on the drive to Glendale that Saturday morning, the 10th Saturday, the one where he'd been cleared to come at 9 instead of 10, a 30-minute expansion of the window that Sophia had announced without ceremony and which Nathan had received as though it were a deed to a kingdom. He thought about choosing. Not the single dramatic choice, the one that made good speeches and got remembered, but the daily version. The accumulative, unspectacular series of choices that either built something or didn't. The choosing to be there at 3. The choosing to get the voices right. The choosing to stay when it was hard and leave when it was time, and to hold without gripping, and to show up without agenda. He pulled up to the apartment on Chevy Chase Drive. The bougainvillea on the courtyard wall was starting to go pink at the tips. Spring coming, incremental, the way all real things came. He climbed the stairs. He knocked on the door at 9 exactly. Oliver opened it. He looked at Nathan, and then at the bakery bag in Nathan's hand, and then back at Nathan. "Mom said you're coming to the park today," Oliver said. "That's the plan. I want to go on the big swings, the ones Mom won't let me use." "How big?" "Really big. I've been ready for months." "We'll see what your mom says." Oliver considered this. "That means no." "That means we'll see." From inside, Sophia's voice. "Oliver, let him in. And put shoes on. We're leaving in 20 minutes. Oliver stepped back. Nathan walked in. Eli was on the couch with Frank, already in shoes and jacket, ready well ahead of schedule because Eli was always ready well ahead of schedule. Marcus was in the kitchen explaining something to Sophia with the detailed patience of a man briefing a committee, and Sophia was half listening while making sandwiches, and the apartment smelled like coffee and peanut butter and whatever indefinable combination of things made a place feel occupied in the truest sense. Nathan set the coffee on the counter beside Sophia. She looked at it, then at him. "The big swings," she said quietly. "He's been asking for 3 months. He told me he's been ready for months." "He probably is." A pause. "Stay close, though." "Always," Nathan said. She looked at him for a moment, not the long searching looks of earlier, the ones checking for the lie, the exit strategy. This was shorter and quieter, a look that had less work to do because some of the work had already been done. She handed him a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "You're carrying the bag," she said, and turned back to the counter. Nathan took the sandwich. He put it in the bag. He stood in Sophia's kitchen on a Saturday morning in early spring and watched his 3 sons getting ready to go to the park. Oliver still negotiating the swings, Marcus now in negotiation about snacks, Eli tying his own shoes with meticulous care and getting the bow slightly wrong and not asking for help. And understood, with a clarity that didn't need words, that this was the thing he'd been building toward his entire life without knowing it had a shape. Not the empire, not the skyline, not the name on the construction fence. This, exactly this, the imperfect, unfinished, ongoing fact of it. New York in April was cold in the mornings and almost warm by afternoon, the kind of weather that couldn't make up its mind, and Sophia had packed for both because she'd learned a long time ago not to trust a forecast. The Marchetti National Final was held at the Culinary Institute's event space in Midtown, a proper venue, not a television studio, which Sophia had been relieved about when she'd gotten the details. She didn't want cameras tracking her face between dishes. She wanted a kitchen and a clock, and the specific, honest pressure of having to cook something true in front of people who understood the difference. Nathan had come to New York with her, not to watch the competition. She hadn't asked him to, and he hadn't offered in a way that required an answer. He'd simply said he had business in the city that week, which was true, and that the boys were staying with his operational director Carmen and her husband, who had 3 kids of their own and had volunteered in the warm, competent way of people who genuinely liked children and knew what they were doing. Oliver had been ecstatic. Marcus had made Carmen a detailed list of his preferences, which she'd accepted with the seriousness it deserved. Eli had packed Frank in his overnight bag and said he'd be okay. Sophia had believed him, which was how she knew they'd all come a long way. The competition ran 2 days. 12 chefs from the regional rounds across the country, cooking down to a final 3 on day 1, then a single signature dish on day 2 in front of a panel of 5 judges that included 2 James Beard Award recipients and a culinary historian who wrote books about the Italian-American immigrant kitchen with the kind of careful attention that made Sophia feel, when she read his work, like someone understood exactly what she was trying to say with food. She didn't sleep well the first night. She lay in the hotel room going over her menu in her head. Not because she doubted it, but because going over things was how she processed them, the same way she went over the boys' schedules in her head each morning to make sure nothing was falling through the cracks. It was a habit of vigilance, the particular insomnia of someone who'd been the only safety net for too long and hadn't fully learned to trust that the net was now wider. Nathan texted at 11:30. "Still up?" She wrote back, "Yes." Occupational hazard. A minute passed, then, "You know the dish. You've been cooking it your whole life. Just cook it." She stared at the message for a moment. It was the same thing she'd told herself, more or less, but it landed differently coming from outside her own head. She put the phone down and closed her eyes, and this time sleep came. Day one was brutal. Not because she cooked badly, she didn't, but because 3 of the other competitors were extraordinary, and being in the same room as someone cooking at the top of their ability made you raise yours, which was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. She advanced to the final 3. The chef eliminated in the last cut was a woman from Chicago who'd been cooking for 30 years, and Sophia felt the weight of that as she walked out of the kitchen. The reminder that time in this profession was no guarantee, that the best thing you could do was keep being honest about what you knew and clear-eyed about what you didn't. Nathan met her in the lobby. He was in a suit, had apparently come from a meeting, and his tie was slightly loosened in the way it always was by late afternoon. "Top 3, he said. "Top 3, she confirmed. "How do you feel?" She thought about it. "Like I've been running at full speed for 8 hours, and tomorrow I have to do it again, but faster." "Okay, dinner. Somewhere that isn't the hotel." "You need to eat something that someone else cooked and not think about food for 2 hours. Come on." They went to a small Italian place in the West Village that Nathan had found. Not because it was impressive, but because it was the kind of restaurant that existed to feed people, rather than to be talked about. Red checkered tablecloths and handwritten menus, and a waiter who called them both Han without irony. Sophia ordered pasta. Nathan ordered the same. They split a bottle of wine and talked about the boys. Oliver's ongoing campaign to be allowed on the big swings had apparently been quietly dropped in favor of a new obsession with a kid at school who could do a cartwheel, and Oliver had been practicing alone in the living room for 3 days. Marcus had decided to start a newsletter for the apartment building, which he'd announced to Carmen as though it were a done deal, and was apparently gathering content. Eli had taught Frank the elephant to play dead, a trick that consisted of laying Frank on his side and saying, "Good boy," with great seriousness. Sophia laughed at that last one, really laughed, the way she hadn't laughed in years. Not the polite version or the relieved version, but the helpless kind that made her press her hand over her mouth because the restaurant was quiet. "He said Frank deserved to learn something new," Nathan said. I quote, "Frank has been sitting still for too long." "That's Eli. That's exactly Eli." She wiped her eyes. "That boy is going to be something." "They all are." She looked at Nathan across the table. The restaurant was warm and the wine was decent, and none of this was what her life had looked like a year ago. And the distance between those two versions was so large she could barely see across it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. Are you happy?" He didn't answer immediately, which was the right response, the honest response, the kind that meant he was actually checking rather than performing. "I don't think happy is quite the word. I think I'm in the right place. For the first time I can remember, I'm in the right place." He looked at her. "Are you?" "I'm getting there," she said, which is more than I could have said a year ago. "That's enough for now." "It's more than enough," she agreed. Day 2 of the competition arrived clear and cold, and Sophia stood at her station in the Marchetti kitchen at 9 in the morning with 4 hours and a clean workspace and everything she needed to cook the dish she'd been carrying inside her for years. She made her mother's braised lamb, adapted, not preserved, not exactly replicated because she wasn't interested in nostalgia as a performance. She took what her mother had made in a small kitchen in Bakersfield with cheap cuts of meat and garden herbs and whatever was at the bottom of the pantry, and she brought to it everything she'd learned in 20 years. The technique from Bologna, the patience from 3 years at Marisol, the understanding she'd developed running her own kitchen about how flavor needed time and couldn't be rushed and couldn't be faked. She made pasta by hand, rolling it out on the floured board with the particular attention that handmade pasta demanded, the kind of work that emptied your mind because it required all of it. She cooked for 4 hours. She didn't watch the other competitors. She didn't think about the judges. She thought about her mother's kitchen and about her restaurant on Brand Boulevard, and about 3 boys eating breakfast at a table in Glendale on a Saturday morning with a man who was learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to be their father. She cooked all of it into the dish. That was the only way she knew how to cook. The results were announced at 4 in the afternoon. Sophia Bennett, Fennel and Sage, Glendale, California. First place. She stood at the podium with the Marchetti Award in her hands, a small, heavy thing, bronze and unpretentious, which she appreciated. And she didn't give a speech because there wasn't one ready, and she wasn't going to perform one. She said thank you to the judges and to the other competitors, who had all been extraordinary, and she said that she'd learned to cook in her mother's kitchen with leftovers and inadequate equipment and an audience of zero, and that she still believed that was where the real cooking happened, not in competition, but in the daily private act of feeding the people you loved with everything you had. She said that last part and meant it in more directions than anyone in the room could know. Nathan was waiting in the lobby when she came out. He saw her face before she said a word, and the expression that crossed his, not performed pride, but something quieter and more genuine. The look of a man watching someone he cared about arrive at something they'd earned entirely on their own made her throat tighten. "First," she said. He crossed the lobby in about 4 steps and hugged her, not tentatively, not the careful boundaried proximity they'd maintained for months. He put his arms around her and held on, and she let him, and she held on too, and they stood there in the lobby of the Culinary Institute with her award between them and the sound of the city outside and everything that had been accumulating in the space between them finally finding somewhere to rest. They flew home the next morning. Sophia called the boys from the gate. Oliver immediately demanded to know her prize. Marcus asked whether she'd beaten everyone, and Eli said, in his careful way, "Did you cook the lamb?" And when she said yes, he said, "I knew you would." She had to turn toward the window for a moment after that. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing about their situation was simple, and the people involved were too honest with each other by now to pretend otherwise. Nathan's role in the boys' lives expanded gradually. Weekends first, then some weekday pickups when Sophia had late nights at the restaurant, then a standing dinner on Thursdays that became the boys' favorite night of the week, because Nathan had learned, slowly and through much trial and error, how to cook exactly 3 things that all 3 of them would eat without negotiation. He moved no one to his penthouse. He didn't suggest they live with him, or that Sophia live with him, or that anything be restructured to accommodate his lifestyle. He came to Chevy Chase Drive. He replaced the burned-out bulb in the kitchen light. He learned the bedtime routines until he could do them without the cheat sheet. He learned that Eli's shoelace bow was always slightly wrong and that correcting it was not welcome, and that learning to tie a correct bow was something Eli would arrive at in his own time. Margaret came once in late summer at Nathan's request and on Sophia's terms. She arrived without her usual armor, no elaborate arrangement, no strategic formality. She sat at the kitchen table in the Glendale apartment, and the 3 boys looked at her with the frank curiosity of children who hadn't been told what to think. And Oliver asked her if she was rich, and Margaret said, somewhat surprisingly, "I used to think that was the most important thing about me." And Oliver said, "What do you think now?" And Margaret looked at her grandson for a long moment and said, "I'm not sure yet. I'm still figuring it out." It wasn't redemption. It wasn't the clean resolution that people wanted from stories about grandmothers who'd done damage. It was a beginning, fraught and necessary, with no guarantee of where it led. Sophia watched Margaret with her sons from across the kitchen and felt something complicated. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the recognition that the story wasn't finished and that she was the one who got to decide how much space to give it. That was its own kind of power, and Sophia had earned every inch of it. Nathan asked Sophia to marry him on a Thursday evening in October, which was not a romantic occasion in any conventional sense. It was dinner night at the apartment. Oliver had spilled juice for the 2nd time that week. Marcus was in the middle of explaining a theory about why the school water fountain tasted different on Tuesdays, and Eli was feeding Frank pieces of bread under the table with the confidence of someone who believed no one could see him. Nathan waited until the boys were in bed. He came into the kitchen where Sophia was doing dishes, and he stood beside her and said, without rehearsal, "I want to marry you. Not because of the boys, not to fix anything, not to make up for what happened. Because I want to spend the rest of my life in whatever kitchen you're in. But I'll understand if the answer isn't yes." Sophia kept washing the dish she was washing. She didn't say anything for a while. Nathan waited because he'd learned how to wait, because patience was the only language this particular situation had ever responded to. "You understand that marrying me is not the same as marrying who I was at 28, she said finally. "I know. I'm more stubborn now. I run a restaurant and 3 children, and I don't ask for help easily, and I probably never will. I know. And my apartment still only has 1 bathroom. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. She set down the dish. She turned to look at him. He looked back. No strategy, no performance, just Nathan, who had arrived in a hospital hallway a year ago and decided, in whatever clumsy and imperfect way available to him, to stay. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. They married in December in the courtyard of the apartment building on Chevy Chase Drive, because Sophia said any venue that required a seating chart was too complicated, and the bougainvillea had gone deep red by then, which was enough decoration for anyone. 30 people. Tomas cried. Leo gave a speech that was funny and honest and ended with something true about the nature of showing up. Oliver wore a tie for 45 minutes before taking it off and putting it on Frank the elephant, where it remained for the rest of the evening. Marcus shook everyone's hand with the gravity of a head of state. Eli held his mother's hand during the ceremony, and when she looked down at him, he was watching Nathan with an expression she recognized, the data collection look, the watchful assessment. And then Nathan caught Eli's eye and gave him a small nod, and Eli nodded back, and that was the entirety of whatever passed between them, and it was enough. The penthouse was sold. Not immediately. The logistics took months, but it was sold. Nathan moved into the house they'd found together in La Crescenta, 10 minutes from the apartment Sophia didn't quite yet want to give up. Large enough for 3 growing boys and a guest room and a kitchen that Sophia redesigned from scratch, with the precision of a woman who knew exactly what a kitchen needed to do. The dining table was chosen by committee, which meant it took 6 weeks, and the final decision was made by Eli, who pointed at a wide, solid oak, one with bench seats, and said, "That one, everyone fits." Fennel and Sage expanded the following year. A second location in Silver Lake, then a commissary kitchen that supplied 3 local school cafeteria programs with real food cooked by real people, which was Sophia's way of building something that outlasted the meal. She hired cooks who'd been passed over, line chefs who'd aged out of the high-pressure restaurants that didn't have room for people who needed to be home by 7, parents who were good at their jobs and couldn't find kitchens that acknowledged both things were true at once. Nathan restructured the Holloway group. Not dramatically, the empire didn't dissolve, and he didn't pretend that was the point, but he redirected a portion of the company's development portfolio toward workforce housing, which was unglamorous and necessary, and generated exactly the kind of returns that required patience rather than speed. He funded a program through Leo's firm that provided legal support for parents navigating custody situations without resources. He did both of these things quietly, without press releases, which was how he knew they were real. He never fully stopped being the man who built things, but he stopped believing the things he built defined him. That distinction, small as it sounds, changed everything that came after. Eli started school the following fall. He was quiet in class and attentive and drew buildings in the margins of his notebooks. Not his father's buildings specifically, but structures of his own imagining, complicated and precise and full of windows. His teacher called Sophia in early October to say that Eli had drawn a building for an art project and written underneath it, in the careful printing of a 5-year-old, "My dad builds big ones, but I will build better ones." The teacher thought it was charming. Sophia thought it was perfectly, exactly Eli. She told Nathan that evening at the table, after the boys were in bed, over the last of the wine. Nathan listened to the whole thing, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He's probably right," Nathan said. "About building better ones? He notices everything. He's patient. He doesn't act until he's certain." He set down his glass. "He'll build something that lasts." Sophia looked at her husband across the table. This man she'd loved once and lost and found again in a hospital corridor under fluorescent lights. This imperfect, late-arriving, genuine person who had learned, slowly and with great difficulty, how to be present for the life that had been waiting for him. She thought about everything it had cost both of them to arrive at this table. She thought about Eli's drawing on the refrigerator, the 3 figures in front of the tall building. She thought about Frank the elephant with his slightly wrong bow tie. She thought about the version of herself who had sat on a kitchen floor at 2 a.m. with a cease and desist letter in her hands, and 3 screaming infants in the next room, and no safety net, and nothing to hold on to except the conviction that she was enough and had to be. That woman had not been wrong. She had been right, and she had been right alone. And the being right alone had been the hardest thing in the world, and she would not romanticize it. But she no longer had to do it alone. And that, it turned out, was not weakness. It was just what life looked like when enough pieces of it were finally in the right place. Not perfect, not finished. The boys would grow up and bring new chaos and new need, and the restaurant would have hard months and the company would face problems, and Nathan and Sophia would disagree about things that mattered and have to work through them, because that was what two people with strong opinions and histories of protecting themselves did when they chose each other without pretending it would be easy. But the table was full, the house had light in it, and somewhere down the hallway, Eli was asleep with Frank the elephant tucked under his arm and drawings of future buildings stacked neatly on his desk. A boy who noticed everything and waited and built carefully and expected the people who said they'd be there to be there. He'd learned that from somewhere. The most valuable things, in the end, are not acquired in a single transaction. They are not announced or accomplished or achieved on a timeline. They are built the way the best buildings are built. Slowly, with attention to what lies beneath, with materials chosen for strength rather than appearance, and with enough windows to let the light in. Nathan Holloway had spent his life building for height. He spent the rest of it building for that.